my pleasure to welcome you to the second week of the Saddleback College Emeritus Institute Dorothy Marie Lowry Distinguished Guest Lecture Series recorded in spring 2021. For information on the Emeritus Institute, please visit www.saddleback.edu/emeritus. I am honored to introduce Professor Laura Hoffman, who teaches art history and photography at the Saddleback College Emeritus Institute and is the organizer of this distinguished lecture series. Without further ado, here is Professor Laura Hoffman, who will introduce today's distinguished guest speaker.
Thank you, Dr. Feldis. So before I introduce Carel Struyken, I want to tell you a little bit about him. He was born in Holland and raised on the island of Curaçao. He completed the directing program at the Netherlands Film Academy in Amsterdam. Soon after graduating, Carel moved to California, where he founded a movie production company with compatriot Renee Daalder. During production of their first musical feature, Population 1, Carel became interested in the application of spherical panoramas for the design of virtual sets. As a photographer, he has produced a number of large-scale virtual tours, such as virtual tours for Mount Wilson Observatory and the Universal Studios backlot and post-production facilities. Since 1978, Carel has also appeared in many feature films and television productions, appearing in The Addams Family, Twin Peaks, Star Trek, The Next Generation, Addams Family Reunion, and more. Carel's topic today is the life and times of photographer Edward Curtis. Welcome, Carel Struyken.
All right. As was mentioned in the introduction, I came to the United States in 1974, 1975. And so I was not as familiar with American history as most of you are. But after I got married in '87, I got married to my wife had worked as a doctor on the Navajo reservation for a number of years, and she had a number of Native American. She had some rugs and a number of books, and amongst those books was this amazing, gigantic book of with photos of Edward Curtis, and that really some of them are like these portraits. When you see them on this scale, are really something else to look at. So that was impressive, but I never read the introduction to the book, so I didn't know how exceptional his life was until many years later. And then I really took a deep dive into his life and his photography. Edward Curtis was born in 1868 in Wisconsin, and I guess his family moved to Minnesota pretty soon afterwards. His father was a war veteran of the Civil War, and was pretty much an invalid and couldn't do very much. And when Edward was 14, his older brother left home So it was more or less up to him to provide for the family. At a very young age, probably, I don't know, 15, 16 or so, he got employed by the by a railroad company. And within a few years, he became a supervisor there. So he must have been 17 or 18 when he was already a supervisor. So that was a good indication that he was not your average kid. When around the time that he was 18, the family had a terrible winter. Their harvest froze up, so they didn't have enough to eat. They didn't have there was a financial crisis, so he lost his job at railroads. And Edward and his father decided to move to Seattle. They staked a claim on the Olympic Peninsula and built a cabin there. And as soon as they were finished with the cabin, they invited the rest of the family over. And as soon as the family had arrived, the father died. And so now again, it was up to Edward to provide for his family. And he started, fishing, doing handiwork for neighbors and everything that he could do to make a buck. And then at 22, he had some kind of an accident and mangled his back very badly and was bedridden for a year. During that year that he was bedridden, he met his future wife, Clara, who was a neighbor and came to visit him to keep him company. And after that year of being bedridden, he realizes that he won't be able to do any physical work anymore. So he gets himself a camera, and a very big one at that, a 14 by 17 plate camera, 14 by 17 inch plate camera. And now one of the funny quotes that I found was he had earlier, as a 12-year-old, he had built his own camera with a lens that his father brought with him from the war. And the book with instructions to build your own camera had a quote that warned that photography was a circus kind of business and not fit for a gentleman to engage in. Nevertheless, he decided that was what he was going to do. And he moved to Seattle on his own, leaving the family on the Olympic Peninsula. First started as a partner in the photography business, and in no time he had his own business. And within 4 years, he had become so successful that he could buy a house, and a house big enough to for his whole family, plus 2 assistants for the photography work. And he soon was the portrait photographer for the Northwest, I mean. And had some more free time because he had assistants, and so he started going outdoors again, and had many. He went to Mount Rainier quite often to take photos. Those outdoor photographers, those outdoor photos soon became very much in demand too. So it was kind of a semi-professional reason to go there. And during one of these trips, hikes up to Mount Rainier, he meets two people from the East Coast. One is Grinnell, who was the, let's see, where are we here? Grinnell. Grinnell, who is the founder of the Audubon Society, and Clint Merriam, who is the co-founder of the Geographic Society. And he becomes fast friends with Grinnell, who invites him to come on an expedition to Alaska as the expedition photographer. On that trip, he takes many photos, but is kind of disenchanted with the way the expedition is going about there. They find a deserted village, and which wasn't unusual because a lot of the natives up there in Alaska would have summer and winter camps, so they would move about. But anyhow, they decide that the village is deserted, and they basically take everything what's there with them that they find of interest. And so this is kind of appalling to Grinnell and Curtis. And Curtis also, Grinnell also tells Curtis that he has been visiting the Plains Indians for the last 20 summers, and invites him to come on a trip there. Before that time, Curtis had encountered the only Native American who was left in Seattle, which was Angeline. Share. And where is she? Yeah, there she is. Angeline was a daughter of Chief Seattle, and the tribe who used to live there had come to some agreement that they would leave the area, probably not voluntarily. But she had decided to stay and was living on the beach in a shack and gathering mussels and doing laundry for some people. And that was it. And he asks her if he is allowed to take some portrait photos of her, and she finally agrees, and he takes her up to his studio, and this is one of the photos that he took. He also took some photos of her gathering mussels, and that kind of gets him interested in shooting more photos of what's left of the Native Americans in and around Seattle. So he starts to take photos of the few natives who have just ignored the treaty and are still living in the area, and wins a photography contest with one of his photos. And anyhow, that was one of the reasons why he that started his interest. With Grinnell, he goes to the northern plains, where there's a Sundance, preparation for Sundance, and this is his first exposure to the way the Plains Indians used to live before they were put on reservations. And this was one of his photos of this camp. Not that many, I mean, before, in the past, these gatherings would be much, much bigger, but this was already a good size. He takes some photos there, and Grinnell kind of shows him the ropes of how to approach Native Americans, and with the proper respect, and not to be too direct, but to kind of first introduce himself and become familiar with his surroundings. And he starts to take his first portraits there. And this is of a Piegan, a young Piegan native. He calls this a native or a Piegan dandy. Now, he was a bit of a dandy himself, as we can see in this self-portrait. Anyhow, during this trip, he realizes that the Native Americans are disappearing before his eyes. What he didn't know, and what people in those days didn't realize, was that North America originally had between 20 and the high numbers, some people think as many as 50 million inhabitants. And then when the Soto started to make his first expeditions up to Mississippi, they introduced European diseases, smallpox, and so on, and about 90% of the population died. So when the first European settlers from other countries, from England and so on, arrived in America, they saw this empty country with hardly anybody in it. And so nobody realized that this was because practically everybody had died off. Around the time, in 1890, they took a census, and the population of Native Americans had come down to 230,000. So Curtis realized that he wanted to kind of document how the Indians used to live before they were gone. Now, in that same period, or rather starting in 1830, the American government started taking Native children off the reservation and putting them in boarding schools with the idea that they should become civilized. And here we see a few interesting before and after photos. And this was really a pretty horrific experience for a lot of these kids, because they couldn't speak their native language. They had to basically forget everything that they grew up with, and that was part of their heritage. At first, he undertakes this all on his own. His photography business is kind of running itself. And he, immediately after the trip to the plains, he takes off for Arizona and New Mexico to the southwestern tribes, because he figures that they probably haven't been bugged as much by the government as most of the northern tribes. And he visits the Hopi. He also witnesses the snake dance, and becomes so, it moves him so much that he asks the chief if he can be, in one way or another, be part of this ceremony. And he's told that no, he first has to learn a lot more about the Hopi, and maybe he can, so he should come back and so this is on his, from his first trip. This is the leader of the snake clan. Then when he comes back to Seattle, the town is excited because Chief Joseph is coming for a visit for some football match. I don't know why that was an event that he had to come there for a football match. But anyhow, that's it was some kind of a combination. And he again is able to get Chief Joseph to his studio and takes a number of portraits. This is one of them. Chief Joseph is belongs to the Pens Nez, which is really the Nez Pens, I mean, which is nearly nez percé, so pierced noses in French. And they, their original treaty had them in the Wallowa Valley in Washington, but then they were kicked out of that valley too, so they had nowhere to go really. And I think they ended up in some camp, more or less in prisons, and eventually in Oklahoma, where most of the tribes ended up, or many of the tribes, I should say. And Chief Joseph pleads during this visit for the football match, he pleads for his tribe that they want to return to the land of their ancestors. But of course, that's not going to happen. Here is this is a map of the areas that Curtis eventually covers over his 30 years. 30 years that it took to complete his work. And it includes Alaska, after his first few trips, which he basically finances with his own money. On the same first trip, he goes to the Apache in the White Mountains in Arizona, and to the Navajo. This is Apache. This is the white. Actually, my stepdaughter, who is Navajo, she is a doctor on the Apache White River Apache Reservation, and he isn't very welcome with the Apache. He tries to learn more about their rituals and about their religion, but he doesn't get anywhere. He does manage to take at least a few photos. This is a recurring theme in his photos where somebody is standing at water. He really liked the effect of having the landscape reflected in the water. Here's another one. Then he goes over to the Navajo reservation. This is one of his famous photos. This is one of Kenyon Duché. I took a spherical panorama at Kenyon Duché, which you can see on my website. It was one of my earlier, so I overdid it a little bit. But anyhow, this is one by a master, and I'm certainly not a master. You'll notice in many of his landscape photos that the people, the Native Americans in the landscapes are not much more than shadows. You can't see any facial expression. And at first I thought that was because the photos in that area, the negative was much more contrasty, so you couldn't really get the whole range of light. So you kind of had to choose which you were going to emphasize. And but later on, I learned that was really the way he wanted it. And I think one of the reasons was that he wanted to emphasize that these people were disappearing before our eyes. One of his more iconic photos is this called A Vanishing Race. And again, I was really wondering why this was such a murky, dark picture. But he actually spent a lot of work in the lab to get it this way. And he really wanted to emphasize that these people were disappearing. He realizes on these first trips that he's never going to be able to get this done unless he gets some financing together. So he's invited by Theodore Roosevelt. He has become famous throughout the United States because of his photography, and Theodore Roosevelt invites him to come and spend time to take pictures of his kids on the East Coast in their vacation home. So he spends some time there and tries to get Roosevelt involved to introduce him to some people who have the money to be able to finance a humongous venture like what he has in mind. He goes to the Geographic Society, to the Smithsonian, and he doesn't get anywhere because he doesn't have an academic degree, so he's not really taken serious. Finally, in 1906, he gets an introduction to J.P. Morgan and manages to have J.P. Morgan finance his expedition. The money is supposed to be used just for the expedition, the expenses of the expedition. And Curtis is supposed to get his money from the publishing of the book series. He has in mind of selling a subscription to a 20-volume series of books for $3,000, which in 1906 would be the equivalent of, according to my Google calculator, it's between $60,000 and $70,000. So that was quite a sum. He was hoping that he would be able to sell this kind of a subscription to museums, to the Smithsonian and so on. And with the $75,000, he is able to get together a crew and go on his first well-equipped expedition with a cook and with a stenographer. Because he wants to be this a real anthropological undertaking, so he takes with him an Edison recorder on those wax rolls to record speech, songs. Soon after, he takes a film camera to also shoot sequences of dancing and other rituals. The stenographer also puts together impromptu vocabularies of the language. And on his first trip, they go back to the Navajo, and back in Canyon de Chelly, and he for a change, he takes his whole family with him. In Canyon de Chelly, there are some natives. A Navajo woman is in labor, and things are not going well, and his expedition is blamed for potential bad outcome of this woman who is in labor, and they have to flee in the night. That's the last time that his wife is going to go with him on one of these expeditions. And from now on, he only takes along his son, who is about 11 or so at that time. They also visit let's see, they first go, so they go to the Navajo, they go on a second trip to the Apache, and this time I'll go over to some more Apache images, portraits. This time he gets a little bit further. He gets to do some more portrait work. Again, here in these groups, with some more surroundings, you really can't see any faces. They're all silhouettes. This is kind of mixed Navajo and Apache. And this is Jicarilla, which is also a tribe nearby. Navajo, Apache. This is Geronimo. That's really, he only got to meet Geronimo when he was on the East Coast, when Geronimo was visiting Teddy Roosevelt. Another Geronimo picture. I often wondered when I was going to, on my trips through New Mexico, why they have so many kind of touristy teepees in New Mexico, because that's not typical for that area. But apparently a lot of the Plains tribes would go to New Mexico on trades, get-togethers. So I guess that's some excuse to pretend there were people who were living in teepees there. Let's see. After these first trips, he takes off to a cabin somewhere in the middle of the winter, so that they will not be disturbed, and they write the 2 first volumes. The 2 first volumes are a tremendous success. They get just the rave reviews everywhere. it's considered the most amazing undertaking since the um, the what is it? The Bible, the King James edition of the Bible, but nobody wants to buy these first two. Nobody wants to subscribe because it's just too expensive. And the museums and the Smithsonian still don't take him serious. So he's in a bit of trouble because he has money for his expeditions, but because he's not at his studio very often, the business is not going as well as it used to, and he still needs to provide for his family. So he decides to start kind of the first multimedia. Hello?
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but for about the last 30 seconds, we did not hear your audio. If you could tell us what you just said, please.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. It was just about the last 30 seconds. We didn't hear that. I'm
All
sorry
right.
to interrupt.
Yeah, so he realizes that because he's not allowed to use the money for the expedition, the J.P. Morgan money for his own family, he needs to make some money. It's not going to come from these books because he can't sell them. So he starts what probably was the first multimedia show, and he calls it a picture musicale. And he uses hand-colored slides, and he has an orchestra. Music is being composed for it, pieces of film. And on one of my trips to Seattle, I got an introduction to the Rainier Club, where Curtis used to stay in later years when his wife had divorced him, and he would stay in the Rainier Club and pay for his room and board by providing them with photos. So they have the whole, it's a gigantic building, 4 floors, I think, half a city block. And it's all the walls are covered in Curtis photos, originals. And one of the things I wanted to find out there was if the prints we are looking at right now, if they looked the way they looked because they had been that they were copies of copies of copies. Each time you make a copy of a print, the contrast gets a little bit higher, so it becomes even more contrasty, and you can even see less of the different gradations in the between black and white. But on the originals, I could see that this really was the way he intended to do it. Let's see what, oh yeah, the colored slides. That's yeah. So on one of these trips, the Rainier Club happened to have a little exhibit, and one of the members of the club had bought a number of hand-colored slides, and these are lantern, yeah, I guess slides. And these were hand colored specifically for this media show that he traveled around with through the United States. This is the Hopi, or one of the Pueblo, probably Hopi, but I'm not sure. And this was a colored image, another slide, but an image. It's one that I found, and I thought it looked pretty amazing to me. So again, the show is an enormous success, but it's also very expensive, and he doesn't really make any money on it, in spite of the fact that it was such a big hit. He finishes the 9th volume in a series, and by that time he's nearly bankrupt. The 9th volume is the I'll take, where are we in our, I'll quickly go through all these photos are online, actually all the books are online, but it's an incredibly cumbersome format. So I downloaded a bunch of pictures to make it a little bit easier. The links to where you can find it online will be provided. So we have already seen the Apache and the Navajo. Here are the Pima. Pima, that's in Arizona, southern Arizona, and the border, Mexico, Arizona. And this is really, you really have to have a special rapport with your subject to get images like that. He didn't use any artificial light. So he had to do a lot of work to get the light exactly the way he wanted it. This, by the way, was the photo that supposedly convinced J.P. Morgan to put down the money. And this is the Sioux and the Yanktonai and the Assiniboine. Yeah, it's kind of different to do this without feedback, because usually when I do this, people say, oh, can you hold on to this picture? Can you go back to this picture? Can I see a close-up? Whatever, I can't do that here, so I'll just go through it. This is a picture of Little Bighorn, where Custer's last stand. He spoke to one of three of Custer's scouts, Native American scouts, who were helping him out during this war. And they described a completely different series of events than what was part of the regular history books. Apparently, Custer hated one of his majors there were 3 battalions, and he split it up in 3 battalions to approach this camp of 5,000 Native Americans from all sides. And one of the battalions was headed by Major Reno, and he had an enormous dislike for Major Reno. So when that battalion started the attack, and things were going wrong, the scouts were saying, "Why aren't you going down? Why aren't you coming down this promontory where Custer was observing the fight?" And Custer just stayed put where he was because he basically wanted Reno dead. And by the time he finally joined the battle, it was too late, and they all got killed. And yeah, okay, well, I'll now go to book 9, which covers the tribes along the coast, Washington and Oregon coast. Here again we have Angeline. The Northeast tribes were pretty wealthy, quote unquote wealthy. It was a strongly hierarchical culture. They had slaves. They went on raids to get slaves. And the Inuit and other Alaskan tribes would stay away because they didn't have that same warlike attitude. And the Russians in the mid-1800s started to hire or more or less force the Alaskan tribes to go hunting for sea otters because the pelts were in high demand in China. And so you would have huge fleets of kayaks going down as far as Northern California to hunt for sea otters. And they would go in these enormous fleets up to 500 kayaks. So they would be able to withstand the tribes, the Kwakiutl and other tribes further south along the Northeast, who would otherwise have attacked them and enslaved them. These are the Kwakiutl. this is where he later on takes a dramatized movie, another effort to make some money. The movie is again a fantastic success, but he gets into a dispute with the producer and again doesn't make a penny on it. The Kwakiuto, also called Kwaka, were not wearing native costumes anymore. So for this movie, they had to make costumes, and they were already encouraged to get rid of all their effigies and things like that. So they probably had to make some of those too, and costumes. For instance, these were made specifically for the movie. This is further. This is the Nutka and the Haida. Again, he always likes to shoot things near water. And there was a bit of a conflict with the editor and the publishers of his books. Curtis was kind of well known for doing tasteful nudes. This was before he started doing Native American pictures. And so he wanted to include more of those. This is one, Maiden of Dreams, it's called. This looks like it was an orotone. Orotone was a different kind of way of printing an image. It was printed on glass, and then the process put down golds, and when you look at the actual picture, it has the illusion of more depth than what you get from a regular image. So, Kwakiuto, Nutka. This was for whale hunting. So this is a whale hunter. Then we go back to the Hopi. Eventually he, because he's going back there so often, he gets, he is allowed to partake in the snake dance ritual. There's some talk, people kind of blame him for staging photos. Some of the images, they sometimes you see the same headdress or shirt reappear in different tribes. Those were things that Edward Curtis owned himself, and whenever he visited a tribe that was so destitute that they didn't have anything to wear that was kind of good enough for a photo, he would dress him in his own costumes. those occasions are pretty rare, so I don't think it's really an issue. There was another issue that there's one famous photo where he here, where he this photo, he took the photo and he hadn't realized that there was an alarm clock sitting between these two guys. And in the dark room, he realized that that kind of would take away from what he wanted to get across in his books. Nowadays, people would leave it in because it would be kind of ironic, right? Well, he was not into irony in that way. So he took it out, and here it's gone. Nowadays, you can do that digitally, and it will take you a few seconds. He had to do it all by hand with little brushes with like one hair. It was an amazingly painstaking kind of work, but he did it. I think it's getting a bit late. So at a certain point, he is sued by his wife because he's not paying any alimony. He gets arrested in Seattle on one of his visits back to Seattle. He explains to the judge that he has never made a penny on any of his ventures. The judge asks him, well, how much has the expedition cost so far? And by his calculations, the Morgan family, both JP Morgan and his son, have invested a total of 2.5 million. That's in 1920s money. So that would be about 50 million in today's dollars, which is a pretty amazing amount of money considering. And none of that money went to him because he would only get paid out of the distribution of the books. The books that were originally for sale for 3,000, the whole set, I found that recently a set had been sold for 2.5 million. So it's a pity he didn't live long enough to witness that, as many artists, as is the case for many artists. He eventually moves to California and is hired by Cecil B. DeMille as a second camera director. He kind of on his own money, he goes to Oklahoma and shoots the tribes there, what is left of them. They're really in horrible shape because they have been put on this is not in Oklahoma. This is a Sundance, part of the Sundance ritual. This is the 19th out of this book series. And eventually his eldest daughter and her husband financed a trip to Alaska. And he manages to get to the island of Nunavik. They buy a boat and they sail to Nunavik, which almost kills them, but they manage to get there. Nunavik is an island that hasn't been reached by the missionaries yet, so he gets to meet native people before they were quote unquote contacted, right? And this is what he finds. These kayaks are just amazing pieces of technology. In Curacao, which is of course the tropics, somebody had a kayak. They are made with seal skins, so the thing just smelled terribly in the tropics. The seal skin was rotting, but I got to ride canoe in it, or kayak in it, I guess. They're very unstable, but they are amazing pieces of technology. And they were made from driftwood. They have the right shape, they have the optimized shape, they have the right flexibility, they have a special kind of bow where the bottom is vertical and the top, it's a split bow, and the top of the bow is horizontal. So the bottom cuts through the water, but when the waves are too high, the top, the horizontal part kind of pushes the boat up, the kayak up. Later on, in the 50s, people figured out that Native Alaskans had a amazing visual and mechanical aptitude. That's probably because they of the environment where they lived in. Soon after this trip of Curtis's, the missionaries make it to Nunavik, and they manage to get all the special ceremonial artifacts destroyed, and well, basically the whole kind of way of living gets destroyed of these people. I spent 3 months in Romania a few years after they got rid of their dictator, Ceausescu, and the country was in terrible shape. Nothing worked. Ceausescu had gotten rid of all the traditional farms. farmers were put in high rises. They were forced to work in cooperatives, and but the technology was never there. Power would go out. There would be no gas for the tractors. But what you would find in Romania was that there were a number of villages that had never been reached by Ceausescu. There were no roads to the villages. There were just donkey or horse paths. And people lived pretty much like they had lived for the last 600 years. And the technology was adequate, but everything worked. The same everywhere where we come in Peru, villages in the Andes. As soon as a road comes through, everything goes south. And well, this is, I can show, I don't know, is there, how much time is there left?
Carel, you could go maybe about another 5 minutes, and then we'll go to questions and answer.
Okay, well, I can maybe show a little bit of the movie. The movie is in terrible shape. It was found in a basement somewhere in the 70s or so. And this was probably done on celluloids, which disintegrates pretty badly. So it's not much to watch, but it's basically a Romeo and Julia story of two tribes, and the boy is from one tribe, the girl is from the other. They meet on this seal island. Curtis almost died on this island because they were dropped off by a boat. And then while they were filming there, the tide came up, and when the boat finally came up, the island was all underwater, and they were standing waist deep on the top of the island, holding the cameras and the equipment above their heads. And then there's a dancing scene, which was kind of reconstructed for the yeah. It's a little bit further. Apparently, the Corcuto had a lot of fun doing this stuff. They had to dramatize a whole raid with these war canoes, but it was all very much appreciated. They had one scene where they're whale hunting, but they weren't doing that anymore. So Curtis had to rent a whale and pull it to where they were filming, and I guess bring it back afterwards. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, so I guess let's go to questions now. Yeah. Hello? Yeah.
Unmuting. Wow, thank you, Carl. I'm just going to unshare your screen and let's see. There we go. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Your talk raises some questions. Very interesting. We have a chance to see these beautiful photographs and call attention to the decimation of Native Americans. I have a question. How was Curtis able to gain the trust of the reluctant Indians and make these beautiful photographs? And that's what they were called. How did he embed himself so deeply?
Yeah, he very often he had to come back again and again and again. With the Apache, he finally he wanted to shoot photos of the sacred secret. There was like a secret skin that nobody was allowed to see. And he finally convinced the medicine man to shoot a picture of it. But the medicine man was so distraught that he died a few months afterwards. In the beginning, there was a lot of resistance. He had a few very close calls where he was attacked. But in the last 14 years, so this was a 30-year venture. In the last 14 years, the tribe started to realize that this was the only thing that was going to be left of them. So they actually started to invite him to come over and take pictures. And for many tribes at this moment in time, his documentation is their most important link to the past. And sometimes the only way to reconstruct the rituals that they used to have. So anyhow, it took many years. Yeah.
Because the images are beautiful. Carl, do you have a favorite Edward Curtis image?
Yeah, well, probably for some reason, well, it's hard. If you ask me tomorrow, I'll point to a different picture, so it doesn't mean that much. But this one, does that show now, or does this picture show?
We're not currently sharing the screen. If you'd like to share it again.
Yeah, this is a Navajo picture. I guess I like this so much because it must have been a very unusual way of shooting a portrait in those days. And I don't know, I think it's a pretty striking image. And then the other one, also probably for the wrong reasons, is this one, just because it's such a beautiful image, beautiful woman. Yeah, what can you say? A lot of his landscape pictures, like the Kenyan Duché pictures, are amazing. Yeah, as I say, every day I'll tell you, and give you a different picture. That's
All
my
right.
favorite.
Yeah. Let me help you share your screen again. For some reason, it didn't share.
Oh, okay.
So you.
Oh, great. First I have to do share, and then share, and then, yeah, this way.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And the other was this one. Yeah. But again, that's kind of random. Yeah.
All right.
Carl, you had mentioned a technique where there was additional depth created in the photograph that involved printing to glass somehow. Could
Yeah,
you
those were
elaborate
called,
on that a little bit, please?
yeah, those were called orotones. And it was one of the main reasons to try to get into the Rainier Club. But ironically, if they had orotones, they didn't want to show them to me. So they showed one of them, but it was not made by Curtis. Curtis prided himself on his own orotone techniques, which he called Curtis tones, but it was basically the same. It was the negative was, I think you first had to make a positive, and then that had to be transferred to a gel on the glass. And the last part of it was to dust it with gold, and then everything else got etched away. Something like that. I'm not sure, or I forgot in the meantime. But it's there are descriptions on it about it on one of the links I have included.
Well, thank you very much. I'll be following up on that. It's very interesting.
Yeah. All the photos in his books, and practically all the photos that we know of his, were photogravures, which was also a very different. It was a print process. So the negative was first you had a copper plate that was made photosensitive with a gel, and then the negative was projected on that, and then it was etched, and you would end up with an etch or a gravure, right? And that was the prints were made of that. And in those days, they could get a better gradation of grayscales on a gravure than they could get on paper. So that's why he liked to do it on a much more labor-intensive process. Yeah.
Thank you, Carl. As tribal customs began to disappear, Curtis had to resort to dressing the Indians, as they were called at the time, and propping the environments himself. Is there a way of determining which of his photographs are accurate and which are staged?
Yeah, it's pretty simple. He traveled around with a chest of costumes, and whenever you see a costume or a headdress or whatever reappearing, you know that they were dressed by him. It didn't happen that often, and he obviously wanted to show people at their best. He was not interested in showing how destitute people were. he wanted to document the past, and he wanted to do that as best as could be done in those days. In other cases, like with the Kwakiutl, it was pretty close in their memory. So it was something they just had to reconstruct, and they did it themselves. And yeah, so it wasn't that much of a fake, really. Yeah.
Thank you.
And Carl, my last question is a little bit technical, and I know that you are a photographer as well. The lighting on his portraits is very thoughtful and beautiful. Did he mostly use ambient light, or did he use any kind of artificial lighting
No, it was all ambient,
available?
except that there are a few pictures he showed, were a few night pictures, and I assume he used flash for that. So you see people sit, or you see like there's some pictures of people on horseback in the night, and I'm assuming he used flash for that. Everything else was with available light, and he obviously worked very hard on that to get it to look like it looked. Share, oh no, first share screen, and then, yeah, so something like this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was critical stuff because, well, first of all, he was traveling around with plates. Some of them were 14 by 17. Some were, he probably had more than one camera, so some of them would have been 8 by 10. So it wasn't like today where you just shoot 50 photos in a portrait session, right? It was one photo and that was it.
Mm-hmm.
So he took a lot of effort in placing people where the light was just right, or waiting for the right time of the day, to shoot them with the right background. And so he really took a lot of effort, and there was probably a lot of dark room technique involved with highlighting and shading and stuff like that. So it was a lot of work, but he got it the way he wanted it to be. Yeah.
Beautiful. All right. Well, I want to thank you, Carl. Thank you there, and I also appreciate you sending a lot of supporting websites and documents. In fact, on this week's module, we have more information if you want to find out more about the work and the life and times of Edward Curtis. And Carl, you recommended a film when we spoke earlier. And I was able to find the preview, but that will also help tell the story.
Yeah, sadly enough, it used to be all online. Now it's only available as DVD.
Mm-hmm.
And I have ordered it, but I haven't received it yet. I was hoping I would get it in time for this talk, but I didn't. Yeah, and well, the title is the same, so I wrote down the title right in my, yeah.
We have it if people want to find out more.
Yeah.
Well, wonderful. I want to thank you again for your illuminating talk. We learned quite a bit. Now we have this ability to look into lives which are now gone, right?
Yeah, and he has become a really important source for for the Native American community as a kind of a reference. Shall I show my my panorama of Canyon du Chet?
Yes. You want to share that?
Yeah, let me, I first have to find it, but and that is, and now I have to go to share, show up.
This will put us
Here we go. This is my interpretation of Canyon du Chet. I was going to a Navajo wedding and I didn't have much time, so I could just take a photo from the rim. But it was already pretty amazing. So I'm standing on this edge here. See, this is the top where Proya Road is, and then you go down, and this was a little ledge that I could put my tripod on. And it looks more dangerous than it was when I was there, but it was an amazing time of day with the clouds and the
wow.
part of it in shade. Yeah. Anyhow, that's that. Yeah.
Well, thank you. That's a
Right.
great note to end this on. Again, I wanted to thank Carel Struyken, and I look forward to learning more. Thank you so much.
All right. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
All right.